Hey guys, it's Hank. I'm going to make a little sense of the world for you right now so it can help put in perspective all these different events that are going on here in the United States and around the world. Now, the global debt-based model, the fiat currency issued by the private central banks, they always knew that that scheme was going to come to an end, just like the British ended their scheme when they had the tally sticks and switched to something else. Any type of fiat currencies always have a lifespan, and it was well known from the very beginning that the fiat currency issued by the private central bank was going to reach a point where it would not be sustainable, it would not be practical, because for every dollar that's brought into existence, there's a certain amount of debt attached to it, and the debt that's attached to it will always exceed the currency that's in inflation, in circulation. Our founding fathers explicitly wrote in the Constitution that that would be illegal. The only power that would be able to issue legal tender would be the United States of America, or a national bank. And what it was intended to do was the government would print the money, it would spend it on infrastructure projects, and then or military expenditures. People would have to buy war bonds. I'm sure you've heard about those days when we actually had to finance our own wars. So basically, the money is not created with any interest. The government then spends the money and then taxes that money back into the government itself in order to balance the budget. And that way you don't end up with any inflation. The only type of inflation that you have is not the inflation that's created by printing money from a private central bank, but the inflation that's created by scarcity of resources. Now, just a couple of key points about what's going on and where we're going to go. We're going to go to a gold-backed currency that's going to be issued by national banks, and this is happening all around the world. The Chinese are in position for it, the Russians are in position for it, the Germans have repatriated a lot of their gold. The United States, I'll get onto that in a second, this is really great. So all these countries around the world are, and even some private corporations, are trying to amass as much gold as possible, because that's what the new currencies are going to be tied to. Now, you're going to have essentially a local currency, like a local dollar, sort of like the Mexican peso, but a little different because it's gold-backed, and we'll be able to settle our trade differences in gold. Now, in the past, a couple of very unfortunate things happened. If you think, let's go all the way back to World War II. Now, in World War II, Germans have been given credit for being looters, or outstanding looters. They were very good at it. They got art and gold and all these other things from countries and territories and peoples that they, for lack of a better word, conquered. And they were able to amass tremendous amounts of gold. Well, one thing that's not really discussed or heard about very much are the Japanese. Now, the Japanese swept through a lot of gold-rich areas in Asia with a brutality and speed that's never been seen before in human history, fully mechanized. They swept through China, the rape of Nanking. They swept through Vietnam. They swept all the way down into India, where the British were. They sacked what at that time was known as Bombay. So all these areas were super, super rich in gold. The Indians had always placed a lot of value on gold. The Chinese had always placed a lot of value on gold. So the Japanese make the Germans look like novices in comparison when it comes to looting. The Japanese literally, I mean, they would vacuum, they vacuumed up all of the gold out of Asia, and there was a lot of it, and a lot of it. And so after the war, I found a receipt that was floating around out there where the gold, and this might actually clear up a couple of things about the end of World War II. Now, what history tells you is that the Japanese surrendered, and yet the Americans still carried on. And why did they not just accept the Japanese surrender? Well, you're told is because the Japanese didn't want for their emperor to abdicate. That was like the one concession that they didn't want to make. Well, that's not entirely true. I think it was about the gold. I think that the United States had a demand. They wanted the loot, and the Japanese were not willing to share with us where they had hidden all that loot. And so Truman nuked the piss out of them. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's what happened. And the Japanese gave the gold up. It's either that or their entire country would be obliterated. So that gold was transferred to Hawaii, where I was able to take a look at a receipt to try and find out where the gold was transferred after that. And there was only one guy that was in charge of the movement of that gold, because it was so important. You have to think about what kind of security is necessary to protect that level of gold. So they didn't want anybody to know about it. I think the one person that knew about it, I forget what his name is, was an attaché to a general and was tasked with this operation. And the gold, I believe, was delivered into the central banking system, because World War II, of course, ended in the 1940s, and the central bank had been around since 1919 in the United States, 1917, 1919. Okay, so you have a tremendous amount of gold out there that rightfully belongs to the United States. Second thing, Fort Knox. Now, Fort Knox was the nation's gold repository, but during the Clinton narcocracy, in addition to the many other crimes that they committed, they stole the gold out of Fort Knox and replaced it with tungsten cored gold-plated bars. In turn, they sold to the Chinese, and those tungsten core bars then made their way into banks around the world. They made their way into Canadian banks, which are still being found today. There's an article not that long ago where they went and did an audit of the Canadian bank where the gold is stored, and they did find some of these tungsten core bars, or core gold bars. It made its way into some Swiss banks. It made its way into the Bank of London. It made its way into, I believe, some German banks. So those funny money gold bars made it all the way around the world. But the Chinese were very, very pissed about it. And I think some concession was made to kind of keep this quiet to the Chinese a good little while ago. What concession that was, I'm not sure. But that was kind of their little payoff to kind of keep them quiet about that massive theft. Well, the narcocracy, the narco presidents, George Bush Sr., Clinton, George Bush Jr., Obama. It actually goes all the way back to Reagan with Iran-Contra. They were all dealing drugs. So when you have a situation that is that corrupt, you have to build law enforcement agencies around that are willing to look the other way for that level of corruption, because they were bringing in tremendous amounts of cocaine from Colombia into Mena, Arkansas, into Sugar Land, Texas, and several other areas in the United States that were basically cabal-controlled counties where everybody was in on it. And when you also have that level of corruption, you have to have law enforcement that looks the other way. For that type of corruption, they're also going to look the other way eventually on other types of corruption too. Multi-billion-dollar child trafficking, gold heists, things of that nature. So you can kind of see where the corruption is systemic. Because when Clinton came in and fired all the judges and fired everybody in the FBI to ensure that his crimes could be covered up and have his lackeys in there, that's what we've been dealing with since before I was born. About 35 years of hardcore criminality in the very highest levels of the United States government in order to bring in the New World Order, which was a form of global fascism, or essentially a world-dominated corporate control, corporatist fascism, worldwide global fascism. All right, so let's move on to the next gold point, 9/11. Okay, 9/11. If you think that just a few Middle Eastern, who were actually Saudis, hijacked and crashed a couple of planes into the trade towers, and World Trade 7, Center 7 just collapsed on its own, and there was no wreckage found at the Pentagon, and that we couldn't get any interceptors up in the air on the day of 9/11. And you believe the government narrative, I can't help you. Go back to sleep. You're a moron. But think for a second, okay? And now move on to the next level of the conspiracy theories that are out there. Now, a lot of people have come to the conclusion, and not wrongfully, that the Project for the New American Century, which is a think tank connected to the CFR, was interested in 100 years of war, of American war, in the Middle East, specifically for the benefit of the Greater Israel Project, to bring those oil fields under control and to complete what I believe is the Zionist agenda, and I think it's from the Nile to the Euphrates, is what they wanted, to claim their land all their own. And the Mossad's very mantra, its motto, if you will, is warfare by deception. So you would think it was an op, okay, that was set up by the Israelis, executed largely by the Saudis, and with the sanction or the blessing of people in the highest levels of the United States government. But ask yourself, why did they have to bring the buildings down? Of course, it has a psychological impact, but just the planes hitting the building would have been enough for us to go into Afghanistan and into Iraq and the other countries. It would have been enough to start a war on terror. To completely demolish the buildings in the fashion that it was seemed a bit excessive. Why take all that risk when you've already accomplished your goal for the Project for the New American Century? Well, that's to cover up the real crime. Now, the world's biggest gold depository for the Federal Reserve, and other people's gold assets, the Germans, their gold was stored. The Chinese had put their gold in the United States for safekeeping, rather. And this was all stored in vaults, or a big vault, beneath the World Trade Tower. So 9/11 was not just about the Project of the New American Century, because you have the official narrative, you have the counter-narrative, and then you have the truth. And it was about a massive gold heist. And that gold heist, that gold disappeared under the Bush Jr. administration, and this would clearly be something that Bush Sr. it would be one of his mad orchestrations, because I think at no time in history have I ever recognized or known an individual to be so corrupt as George Bush Sr., who's been pulling the strings for virtually all of the narco presidencies. Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama. So all that gold stolen, and that would, so 9/11 basically cover up the real crime. Now, fortunately, you've got guys out there that are similar to Comey. Now, Comey is kind of an interesting case. His entire career has been following around the Clintons and the Clinton corruption, and a good counterintelligence agent or embedded agent or a good FBI agent, DEA agent, anybody that's in counterintelligence, sometimes you're never going to be able to tell if they're a good guy or a bad guy. Yet, that's the name of the game, because if they recognize you're a good guy, you're dead. You're deader than fried chicken. So a lot of times, those guys are going to go along to get along, and you're never really going to know what side they're on. But the whole time they're collecting information. They're finding out, where this gold is. Now, I don't know if Comey was one of those types of good guys, but that's what they do. And they do anything to protect the big score, like the gold. And what does it matter? What's their objective the whole time? It's just to keep track of where these assets are. So word on the street nowadays is, and I believe it absolutely because it's coming from very reputable sources, is that the gold that was stolen has been recovered by the Trump administration. So kudos to him, kudos to the good guys, kudos to the NSA, who many refer to as the wizards and warlocks. So now we can actually go back to a gold-based dollar, because we do have the reserves to make that a possibility. Otherwise, we would have been in a situation where we owed so much money to the Chinese holding all these treasury bills, that it could have been, we would have had to sell the leasing rights to the Grand Canyon and for the Chinese to come out and mine the significant gold deposits that are in the Grand Canyon. And if you look at it, the park attached to the Grand Canyon continues to expand. The federal government continues to expand that park southward down into Texas, because that whole area is one giant vein of gold. Okay, so let me take a little sip of water here. Now, what you may not be understanding right now about the tariffs and the trade imbalances. Okay, so if you go back to a system that doesn't have funny money, the first thing you have to do is end the trade imbalances, because if you have a trade imbalance of like 330 some billion with China, or 18 billion with Canada, if you have all these trade deficits around the world, when you bring in that new currency, you are losing tons and tons and tons of gold, which we cannot afford to lose. So you have to absolutely clear those trade imbalances. It's critical. The American people may be forced to do a little bit more with less in the interim while we get our manufacturing back online. But all of American manufacturing is not dead. And the Chinese will bend over backwards to continue to do business with the United States, because it is the world's largest economy. We have what they want, and they really don't have anything but finished goods that we really need from them, aside from a little bit of titanium. The Chinese do have titanium. But from what I've heard, the Japanese were just found a tremendous, a motherlode of rare earth elements out in just off of their southeastern coast. I'm talking about enough rare earth elements to keep the world in business for a long time. An absolute treasure trove of rare earth elements for electronics and so forth. So that's very, very good for the Japanese. Okay, so you correct the trade imbalances so we're not getting absolutely devastated when we bring in the new currency. And we're withdrawing the military around the world. So you see peace breaking out in North Korea. Now, to me, it was a foregone conclusion that we would not be going to war with North Korea for several reasons. One, it's in China and Russia's backyard. They're not going to be having the United States down there building bases or bombing or perhaps even nuking anything in their backyard. They don't want that. So the Chinese and the Russians probably made it very clear early on that there will be no military actions in that area of the world. And President Moon of South Korea has turned out to be an amazing statesman. And he, and along with Dennis Rodman, and let's give Dennis Rodman credit where credit is due. The man is an American hero, an unsung American hero, an outstanding diplomat. You know, it takes a lot of balls to be a guy with all the propaganda that was out there, to be a guy to go over to North Korea by yourself and visit the dictator of North Korea, because we had always heard this bull crap, like he chopped up his uncle and fed him to the dogs and machine gunned a bunch of his relatives and stuff. Dennis Rodman came back and told us none of that's true. He's actually a pretty nice guy, pretty reasonable guy. So yeah, let's give a lot of credit to Dennis Rodman. And let me expand on that point a little bit because I can't emphasize it enough. Think about the diplomats that we've had operating in the State Department. Okay, let's pick Hillary Clinton. What do we have? Wars all over the place. Libya was destroyed. Migrant crisis into Europe. John Bolton, you know, with his rhetoric, you know, is supposed to be an American diplomat or part of the State Department, I believe, at one time. You know, just think about the long lists, and I can't name them all right now, but think about the long list of diplomats that we've been having in the past 35 years. People related to Kissinger and his whole, and Zbigniew Brzezinski and their whole philosophy and ideas. It's been one failure after another, destabilizing governments, bringing in these coups, causing instability around the world, which has benefited the United States absolutely friggin' zero bupkis nothing. But it did achieve the goals of the narco presidency, the cartels, the American cartels. So, yeah, like Libya, for example. I know I talked about this in a previous video, but what do they really want from Libya, okay? They were selling weapons out of the Benghazi embassy. And what Hillary Clinton told everybody was that a YouTube video inflamed the Muslim population in that area. They hated Americans, and they went and attacked the embassy. You know, the ambassador, he has, you know, you reap what you sow. He has blood on his hands. He was complicit in the whole scheme. But what the attackers that attacked the American embassy in Benghazi didn't realize is that the CIA had stored those weapons in a warehouse not far from the embassy. The primary objective of the attack was to seize the weapons that were coming out of the Benghazi embassy, and probably get a little revenge too, because they drugged that ambassador out, they sodomized him, and drug him through the streets and essentially ripped him apart. The American military, the QRF, or Quick Response Force, was ordered to stand down. I think this came all the way from the highest levels, either Hillary Clinton herself, possibly even Barack Obama, but I'm not entirely certain about that. But it did come from a very high level in the State Department for these guys to stand down. Now, a few of them said, fuck it. Americans are under attack. We're going. And they did, and a few of them lost their lives for it. But those guys, American heroes. Okay, never forget that. They sacrificed to protect Americans, and that is the epitome of honor. Now, we're withdrawing military all around the world. One was the North Korea. We made concessions with the Chinese. We're withdrawing from the South China Sea because it's way too expensive. And Donald Trump even recognized this. He said it's too expensive to continue to run these war games off of the coast of China and North Korea and Russia. Because just imagine, okay, you fill your car with gallons of gas. You know, think about what it takes to fill a B-52 out of Guam and fly it all the way over there and back, or to carry out flight operations on these carriers. We're talking about extreme amounts of money. So every time those B-52s are sitting there parked is buku bucks that the United States, the people of the United States, are saving. So every time we're not carrying out flight operations is a time that we're saving buku bucks. So that's the purpose of withdrawing the military. Now, what's going to happen in the Middle East, I can't quite yet say, because unlike the North Koreans, with Russia and China on its border, there's and very little natural resources we can get to easily. We can actually get to the lithium deposits that the North Koreans have through trade, and they're going to be very happy to trade. Peace through trade is the way to go. But in the Middle East, I can't be terribly certain about yet at this point, because the oil resources there are rich. Saudi Arabia, from what I understand, is just about out of oil. Anytime you're pumping oil out of the ground, you're compressing the oil deposit with water, and everybody knows that if you put water and oil together, it doesn't mix and the oil floats to the top. And if you put it under pressure, you're going to pump that oil out of the top. And from what I've heard, the Saudi Arabian deposits are basically pumping out mostly water. And that's why the Saudis have attacked Yemen. That's why the Israelis are so concerned about the Golan Heights in Syria, is because those countries want access to the oil fields that are in that area. So Saudi Arabia has even done some lateral drilling into Yemen, and it's the same thing with Israel. Israel has done some lateral drilling into Syrian territory. So what's going to happen in the Middle East, I'm still not entirely certain about. I had said in a video a while back that there were some rumors floating around that there could be a limited nuclear war in the Middle East, and because of where it is geographically located, there's very little in the way of ecology that's going to spread that radiation throughout the world. You know, I'm a man of peace. I would rather see peace through trade than to see the major powers in the world have a limited nuclear engagement in the Persian Gulf. But that could be something that the Chinese would be on board with. That could be something that the Russians would be on board with, and that could be something that the United States could be on board with. And then they have free reign over those assets. So Iran is trying to be very cooperative with China and with Russia. And if the United States could get its head out of its ass and throw that liability called Israel under the bus and develop a better relationship with Iran, we could also have a nice piece of what they've got going on as the New Silk Road, or the Belt and Road Initiative, moves through Iran and into Europe as an overland trade route with high-speed rail. Okay, moving on. Stock market crash. Okay, these are the things that have got to happen first, or hopefully we can get them in play before the world goes into a reset. Stock market's gotta crash because number one, it's right now anybody that trades in the market knows that for any asset there is absolutely no price discovery. Their price to earning ratios are blasted completely out of the water, and it all has to do with algorithmic trading and Federal Reserve pumping QE into the stock market, where certain players and certain banks are able to get cheap credit, which is they can borrow money at extremely low interest and leverage what they borrow in investments that have an extremely high return in the stock market, because it's all algorithmically manipulated. So if you want more information on that, I made a video called "Why Hasn't the Stock Market Crashed?" and that'll make a little bit more sense. So the tariffs, the isolationist, protectionist policies that the United States are engaged in right now will have an effect on the stock market, but I think what is going to crash the stock market, and hopefully this is a timetable that we can work with, is the dissolution of the EU. Now, Italy has finally gotten in a populist party that consists of two elements. One is the Five Star Party, and the other one, I forget what the name of it is, but they've wrested control of Italy, gone nationalist, and they're to deport 500,000 illegal immigrants back to Africa. Italy is the third largest country in the EU, or the third largest economy in the EU. The only two that are bigger are, I believe, Germany and the UK. So, if Italy goes, it's going to put a lot of pressure. The British already want out, but in my estimation, the Bank of London and the Crown are so far into this whole globalist scheme. This whole thing is a construct of British imperialism. The way for them to get their hooks into the United States and to everybody else around the world. It's a kind of a collaboration between Germany, and globalism is kind of a collaboration between Germany and the British, but mostly the British. So they really don't have a plan B. I don't think. I think if the game of musical chairs and the music stops and everybody rushes to sit down, I think unfortunately the British are going to be the ones still standing there holding the bag. And fuck them rightfully. And the British have a lot of internal problems right now. The British people have been calling for Brexit, and their government doesn't want to let them do that. If they had actually listened to the British people and gotten their house in order, they may have been able to kind of salvage an arrangement and been able to get out of it relatively unscathed, but the British people are going to be in deep, deep trouble. The Germans have been playing both sides. It's kind of strange because, you hear the seat of the EU being in Brussels, and then Angela Merkel hops on a plane with her cabinet and rushes off to Beijing to have secret meetings with Xi Jinping. So the Germans are very, very clever people. They probably played both sides, and they repatriated their gold. Don't forget that. So the Germans have a very, very strong industrial economy. They produce great goods. They've got a trade surplus. So the Germans will probably do very well to weather the storm, although they are having serious problems with the the influx of immigrants. I suspect that when the global currency reset starts and all those social welfare programs disappear, there will be war in Europe again, unfortunately. I mean, look in history. World War I, World War II. Where does it always start? It starts in Europe. And they'll settle their difference quite violently. And the Turks have already made kind of a statement telling the Germans, no, we don't want you to kick the migrants out, because they're all Muslim, they're going to want to go to Turkey. And what's probably going to happen is the Germans are going to kick them out, and they'll build a fence, and the Turks will build a fence, and those people will be caught in the middle, basically, and they'll be machine gunned on either side. So, yeah, bad days for those guys. The British are gonna need to muster the political will to do the same thing. They're just going to have to, otherwise Britain is lost. Same thing with France. I mean, who would have ever thought that replacing your population with a foreign religion, a foreign ideology, and an entirely different people would be a good play? There's something called culture shock. Crusades have been going on for thousands of years. Replacing your population, because it has declining birth rates, with third world immigrants that are not secular, that do not speak the language and not share the values of the people, destroy the culture. And this is something that cultures in Europe have been striving to save and maintain for thousands of years. They've fought each other to maintain, the French way of life, the British way of life, the German way of life. Now, Poland, Hungary, they got on the nationalism train way early. They saw the damage that was being done. They got Viktor Orban in, I believe, Hungary now, and I believe the Poles have a new prime minister. And forgive me maybe if I mix a couple of those up, but they're highly nationalist, and they're already saying, no social welfare programs for anybody that's non-native. They're banning some of the mosques. I think they're going to be working on deportation next. They built a border wall to preserve their culture, and it was a very, very smart move on their part. I imagine there's going to be a pivot towards Russia for a lot of those countries. I mean, because they remembered what communism was like under the Soviet Union, and the way to destroy a nation is through population replacement. It's the way that the Chinese have actually been doing warfare for thousands of years. What the Chinese do is they basically send an influx of Chinese into an area, and then they just breed and build up and build up and build up, and then they just claim it as China. And it happens over and over and over again. That's how the Chinese have typically, I'm not going to say waged war, but they've expanded their empire over 2,000 years. China is kind of similar to the United States in the sense that it's kind of a cultural melting pot. It's got a lot of different languages, a lot of different peoples, a lot of different beliefs that all call themselves Chinese. So that's a little worrisome for the Canadians, because the Canadians, I don't think, are in a very good position to weather this upcoming world currency reset. And that's why they fought it so hard at the G7, or probably soon to be G6, which was once G8. And the Chinese have a very large population that has moved into Vancouver and bought a lot of the real estate in Vancouver. So the Chinese have a strong foothold in Vancouver. So what they'll do is they'll immigrate more Chinese there, and then that area will become basically a Chinese colony, and likely to expand. So if the Canadians are not extremely careful about what they do with immigration, countries like China will get a toehold in there. Same thing to a lesser degree in some areas in the United States, but the United States, we have a history and a tradition of ripping off foreign investors. We did it to the Japanese in the 1990s in New York City. The Japanese had a big boom in the 90s. They came in to New York and bought up a tremendous amount of New York real estate, and then the United States basically just pulled the rug out from under them and screwed them all and bought all that real estate back at pennies on the dollar. So the United States has got a history of screwing foreign investors that try and get too much, that get too much of the United States, too big a piece of the United States. Now, if Trump had not, the Trump administration had not been able to recover that gold, we could have been looking at some very bad situations to reconcile our debts and trade imbalances, like selling the Grand Canyon. You know, that type of stuff is very possible. Think about the austerity measures that went on in Greece. You know, you lose your art, you lose your museums, you lose your natural resources, wide swaths of land, mining rights. So we could have lost the Grand Canyon, but since the Trump administration has found and repatriated that gold, it is a good day to be an American. God bless America. Okay, so stock market crash has got to happen. There's going to be a drop in the housing market because we're in an asset bubble. Those assets kind of, they need to return to fair market value. If you go out and look at anything like Zillow, you can see a tremendous amount of inventory on the market, which frustrates me to no end because everything is so price controlled and they have to keep the property market inflated in order, one, to keep local tax revenues high, or tax assessments high, so they can tax and run counties. The second thing is it's a way, when you don't have any production in an economy, it's a way to give the consumer an illusion that they're earning money when they're really not. And it gives them confidence to spend money because most people are not rational economic actors. You know, Adam Smith, you know, if you read his work, he all of his theories on economics are based on the rational economic actor, and people are not rational economic actors. So these inflated housing prices give people the idea that they're able to spend money and borrow against their house and all these different things, which make them feel wealthy when in fact they really are not. So a return to fair market value is absolutely critical. And like I said, it frustrates my generation to no end to see all this inventory on the market, and then they want me to go out and pay, you know, $250,000, $300,000 for, you know, a single family rancher, and I'm not going to do it. I recognize the value of things, and I'm not going to overpay for something. So, and that's just that. Halting immigration. Okay, some people say, oh, it was about racism, about this and that, or population replacement. Yes, maybe to a certain extent. But the critical part of halting the illegal immigration into the United States is basically we do not need any more people that are going to be poor in this country when the reset happens, because that's going to mean a lot of violence, because we're not going to be able to take care of everybody. We're just not going to be able to do it. So the fewer poor people that we have right now, the better. So that illegal immigration has got to stop. And when we're ready to bring in more immigrants to be vetted or whatever, we're going to want the highest caliber people, not the dregs of whatever's being released from the prisons in South America, as communists like George Soros and Obama and Hillary Clinton had wanted. Okay, we got to decriminalize a lot of the petty drugs. We've got to end the dependence on the prison industrial complex, because we're not going to be able to afford to maintain such a high prison population. So that type of stuff is probably going bye-bye. It costs something like $70,000 per person in California to incarcerate someone, $70,000 per year. So, you know, people with petty drug crimes and stuff like that will be gone. And really, it is a travesty, because you've got the narco presidents importing the drugs. Because, you know, I remember back in the early 90s, you know, I always used to hear conspiracy theories coming out of the black community, like, you know, the CIA is supplying us with drugs, the CIA is supplying us with money, the CIA is trying to destroy our communities. And I was thinking, what a bunch of bullshit, that's crazy. But then, as I went back to re-examine my beliefs, I thought, yeah, they don't grow any fucking cocoa plants in LA. They don't have any poppy seeds in LA. They don't, like this industrial scale drug operations are coming from the CIA to fund their black projects, and also part of COINTELPRO, which is a FBI operation, where they used it to destroy black communities and black leadership after the civil rights movement. And like Malcolm X said, what's good for the black community is good for the white community. It's good for everybody. Strong communities with strong leadership help everybody. There's no threat to any of us, whether white or Asian or anything, from the black community. We're just people. We're all Americans. We're all working together, and to have strong black communities is a strong America. So we need to, I think, hopefully we've lost a lot of that racism that was around, during the civil rights movement and stuff. And instead of destroying black communities, we should be working very, very hard to elevate black communities. And that way you don't have to worry about social welfare programs. You don't have to worry about black-on-black violence. It's a real travesty what was engineered, socially engineered, to destroy the black community. And I didn't really start to realize this until my own generation had been disenfranchised through the greed and the graft of the government. So, by a corrupt government, and it really, really opened my eyes to how wrong that is, to deal with the black community in that way. So hopefully, we'll be very forward thinking about that moving forward. We're going to have to the rat lines, the black market rat lines, are getting shut down by a number of different forces. Because you have to stop the importation of the drugs, you have to stop the child trafficking. The child trafficking operation's multi-billion-dollar industry, so they're not going to go away without a fight. And these harken all the way back to families like the Bronfman family, who were big whiskey and rum runner and liquor dealers during the Prohibition era. You don't hear so much about them, but they're tied to the Nexium cult. They're tied to the Rothschilds and all this other stuff. So destroying those rat lines are also critical, because we don't want our United States dollars, our new currency backed by gold, to be flowing out of the country anywhere. We want to be able to tax that back into the government. So what are the effects of this that you need to be aware about moving forward? Social welfare programs are going to be slashed. It's going to make 1929 in the early 1930s look like a field day. There will be probably soup and bread lines that you'll have to stand in if you don't have money. Getting heating oil might be an issue for you. Hyperinflation might be an issue for you. In any type of system, in any type of reset, in any type of chaos or turmoil, in any disaster that's ever happened in human history, the poorest people are the ones that suffer the most. And I implore you, if you're Christian as I am and you have faith as I do, consider your neighbor. Love thy neighbor, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay, so if you have time to volunteer during this reset, you might not get paid for everything, but if you want a strong community, you need to say money is not everything. Building a strong community is what it's about. I don't need to get paid to go down and help at the soup lines. I don't need to get paid, to help, do some reconstruction efforts or whatever. But here's the good news. Social Security, I suspect, for the elderly, for the retired, will be paid by the National Bank in order to repatriate some of this currency. It's a good way to keep the economy from freezing. It's a good way to reward the people that have worked their entire lives and are deserving of that retirement, and getting those dollars flowing in the economy, so you can increase money velocity, keep the economy moving. The infrastructure projects will be paid as the Constitution intended. As the government prints the money, it's paid on infrastructure projects. So there'll be jobs that'll be coming out for, bridge building, road building, high-speed rail. We're going to need a lot of help from the Chinese. Hopefully we can get some Chinese investment. Hopefully, and the Trump administration, again, has done a great job of cooperating with the Chinese and done a great job of cooperating with the Russians. And that's where the pivot's going to be. It's going to be a coalition, I think, between China, Russia, America, and whoever is smart enough not to be the last one sitting down when the musical chairs ends in Europe. A multipolar world, if you will, which I think is a lot safer than globalism. Hyperinflation is gonna happen probably before the new U.S. dollar is released. The gold-backed U.S. dollar. Hyperinflation is probably gonna really take off. Those are going to be tough times, but it will make debts that people have seem very, very nominal or minimal by comparison. There's a strong possibility that to help ease the transition, because the central banking system is illegal under the Constitution anyway, those debts can be nullified. So it's quite possible that all the student loan debt gets wiped out. Maybe a lot of credit card debt and stuff gets wiped out, because the people that money is owed to have come through it against United States constitutional law. So it could be, to nullify those debts, which again will get that money velocity moving again quickly, because you don't pay all this interest on that debt. You have an opportunity to get out there and make real money and save real money and build businesses and things like that. I expect a lot of deregulation, cutting out a lot of that red tape. I expect a lot of government workers to be losing their jobs, a lot of them, because in a system where the United States National Bank prints the money, everybody, when they pay their taxes, are going to have to pay for each and every program. Unlike today, where they can just QE, funny money, whatever they want to, and then manipulate the interest rates and hyperinflate to their heart's content. Every program that the United States government gets involved in is going to be felt in your piggy bank with real money. So I think a lot of people are going to want to do away with a lot of needless bureaucracy, and I think that is going to go bye-bye. So that's pretty much the rundown on that. Again, if you haven't gotten, just take $1,000 and get yourself some silver, because right now the price is manipulated. You can get an ounce for less than $20. Okay, and it's a way to preserve your wealth. It's also a way to have something to barter with when the old central bank fiat currency starts to hyperinflate, because it'll hold its value. It'll also be something that will match with the new U.S. dollar that's being brought in. Now, the new U.S. dollar will be more like of a local currency, because it's not going to be based on the petrodollar anymore, and we'll be reconciling our trade with the gold reserves that we have. So we have to be very careful about trade, and we'll probably be moving into the future of serious trade surpluses, but it's going to take time. It's kind of hard to undo 100 years of central bank illegality and 35 years of criminal narco presidents in just a very, very short amount of time. So get ready for the pain, but the American people are the greatest people on earth. That's why everybody wants to come here. That's why, you know, if you look at the protests and stuff, the free speech protests they have in Britain, you know, and then you look at the free speech protests we have in America, okay, the British people are all out there. They're unhealthy. They're stumbling around. They're all drunk for the most part. And if you look at a free speech rally here in the United States, those guys are out there in bulletproof vests. They're armed to the teeth. They're peaceful. American people are strong. We're self-reliant, and we're ready for what comes next. And we're a faithful people. So don't forget, one of the most important parts is prayer. And it's been Hank. Catch you on the flip side. Peace.